when the oceans disappeared. Before we begin tonight's quiet journey, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Let the day drift further away. If you find comfort in these slow stories of forgotten worlds, you can gently subscribe, like, or share this channel. It helps this calm corner of history continue to exist and allows more quiet travelers like you to find their way here. Now, imagine standing at the edge of the sea, only the sea is gone. The day the shoreline moved. There was a time when the oceans stepped back, not in a single violent moment, not with towering waves or thunderous storms, but slowly, patiently, quietly. So slowly that no single generation noticed the beginning. And yet, over centuries, the shoreline moved farther and farther away. Where once gulls had circled above crashing surf, now wind drifted across bare earth. Where salt water once shimmered beneath a summer sun, there lay a wide plain of exposed seabed, silent, immense, and unfamiliar. This was not a myth. It was not a legend whispered beside medieval hearths. It was the rhythm of the planet itself. Approximately 100,000 years ago, the Earth entered one of its great cycles of cold, a pattern so vast and slow that it unfolded beyond the scale of ordinary memory. Ice began to gather in the far north, not as scattered snowfields, but as something far heavier, something patient. Winters lingered longer, summers softened. Snow that once melted fully now left thin white traces behind. Those traces thickened, layer upon layer, year upon year. And far away from the growing ice, along distant coasts, something almost imperceptible began to happen. The waterline shifted, just a little. At first, it was the difference of a few steps. Fisherfolk might have noticed their boats resting slightly farther from the tide. Marshlands dried in patches, small sandbars stretched wider than before. But decades passed, then centuries, and the sea continued its retreat. The weight of frozen water. When water freezes, it expands. It becomes something solid, crystalline, reflective. But more importantly, when snow falls year after year without melting, it does not remain soft. It compresses. Snow becomes firn. Firn becomes glacial ice. Glacial ice becomes something nearly rock-like in its weight and density. Across what is now northern North America and northern Europe, ice sheets began to spread out from their centers. They were not jagged glaciers tucked neatly into valleys. They were continental. Imagine a frozen blanket nearly 2 miles thick pressing down upon the land. The weight was so immense that the Earth's crust itself bent beneath it. Entire regions sunk slightly under the pressure. But here is the quiet exchange that shaped everything. The water that fed those ice sheets did not appear from nowhere. It came from the oceans. Every snowflake that did not melt was a drop removed from the sea. Every winter that lingered longer meant less water returning. And so, inch by inch, the global ocean level fell. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. Over thousands of years, sea levels dropped more than 400 feet. Entire continental shelves, those shallow underwater edges of continents, rose into the open air. What had once been seabed became dry land. What had once been islands became hilltops far inland. And the shoreline moved. A vast new world. If you had stood on what is now the eastern coast of Asia during this time, You would not have seen a narrow strait separating Siberia from Alaska. You would have seen a broad, wind-swept plain stretching toward the horizon, a Brendinger, a land bridge, a place we now call Beringia. But at the time, it was simply land. Grassland spread across it. Mammoths roamed there. Herds of steppe bison and wild horses grazed across soil that had once rested beneath cold ocean currents. Humans, too, would eventually cross that exposed corridor. But in this first quiet episode of our story, let us stay earlier still. Let us stand not among migrating hunters, but at the edge of a European shoreline, watching the sea withdraw. The medieval eye.
When the seas stepped back, the retreating water. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and cold earth. The shoreline that had once welcomed waves was now a wide plain of glistening mud and scattered shells. The sea had not disappeared suddenly. It had only stepped back, exposing new land that seemed older than time itself. Eldrick, standing beside him, Mira, adult female early human, approximately 32 years old, warm olive skin tone, long dark braided hair partially covered by fur hood, soft brown steady eyes, slender yet strong physique, wearing thick animal skin garments decorated with simple carved bone beads, carrying a woven basket made of dried reeds, composed, resilient expression, nurturing, grounded presence. Observed the shifting sands, exposed reefs and tidal flats. Where shallow reefs had once teemed with small fish, now rock pools reflected the pale sky. Tiny crabs scuttled across the exposed surfaces. Water had withdrawn slowly over decades, leaving creatures and plants stranded, forcing them to adapt to new patterns or perish. Eldrick carefully stepped forward, testing the firmness of the mud. His spear pointed ahead, not in aggression, but as a support against uneven terrain. Mira followed close behind, picking up fragile shells that might be useful later for crafting or ornament. No dramatic action occurred. The scene was calm, solemn, and slightly eerie in its emptiness. The vast new plains. Further inland, what had been deep channels of water now formed meandering streams, their surfaces frozen in pale light. The sun glinted off thin ice sheets forming in pools, yet the air was still cold enough to preserve the snow lingering from the higher north. Children of the nearby band watched silently from behind rocks, their eyes wide at the changing landscape. They had never seen the sea retreat so far. The land seemed to stretch endlessly. Ice reflecting sunlight. In the distance, the growing northern ice sheet reflected soft light across the plains. Shadows stretched slowly across barren earth. The landscape appeared almost like a painting by a 14th century artist. Flattened perspective, muted tones, soft haze, calm stillness. Eldrick's eyes followed the horizon. He could sense the cycles of the earth, moving in ways humans could barely comprehend. The retreating water was one quiet signal among many. Preparing for new paths. For the humans, this slow change created both challenge and opportunity. Paths that had once been water routes were now land bridges. Hunting grounds shifted. New plants appeared where shallow water had left soil enriched with sediment. There was no sudden drama, no thunderous waves, only time, patience, and subtle transformation. Eldrick and Mira led the small group across the new shore, testing the firm ground, guiding the children, silently marking the subtle signs of life adjusting to retreating waters. They were witnesses to a quiet miracle, the world itself changing shape without notice, leaving traces for those who could observe carefully.
The land bridge that shouldn't exist. Silent passage. The wind whispered across a vast plain where water had once ruled. What had been an endless ocean was now firm earth underfoot. The tides had receded far enough to expose a corridor stretching between continents, a bridge of stone, sand, and ice that connected lands that had never been joined in human memory. Eldrick, standing nearby, Mira surveyed the newly revealed land bridge. Crossing into the unknown. This bridge, later called Beringia by future generations, was not a simple path. Ice and snow still lingered in patches. Strong winds swept across the plain. Strange, unfamiliar sounds of grazing animals echoed in the distance. Yet for the humans who dared to walk it, the path offered opportunity. Fertile hunting grounds, open plains, and new sources of water. Children in the small group clung to the adults, shivering as they took their first steps onto the frozen soil. Eldrick's spear served not only as support, but as reassurance, a silent promise that he would protect them as they moved into unknown territory. Life on the exposed land. The land bridge was not empty. Herds of steppe bison moved cautiously across the expanse, while mammoths trudged slowly, leaving deep impressions in the snow-flecked ground. Birds circled overhead, scanning for food or shelter. Each step the humans took disturbed the fragile balance of this land. Shells once hidden beneath shallow water cracked underfoot. Small crustaceans scurried quickly into crevices. Ice and snow, though sparse, reflected sunlight in a cold, diffuse glow that made the plain seem both beautiful and unwelcoming. The subtle pulse of time. Above all, the land bridge was a reminder of time's quiet power. The earth moved in ways humans could sense only indirectly. The slow advance of ice, the retreat of the seas, the steady shaping of continents. Seasons came and went with gentle rhythm, sometimes harsh, sometimes forgiving. Eldrick and Mira did not measure these cycles in years or decades. They measured them in survival, where to find water, which paths were safe, where the herds traveled. But they were not blind to the enormity around them. They felt it in the cold bite of the wind, in the shifting ice beneath their feet, in the vastness of the horizon, stretching endlessly in all directions. A new perspective. For the first time in their lives, these humans saw that continents were not static. They moved, reshaped by forces invisible yet immense. The land bridge was proof. A corridor of survival born from retreating oceans and advancing ice. The humans did not know that one day, long after they were gone, explorers and scientists would study this land and marvel at how it had enabled species, including humans, to traverse the globe. But in this moment, Eldrick and Mira understood it in simpler terms. The land was a path, a chance, and a world waiting to be navigated. Quiet vigil. Even as the humans walked, Eldrick paused to observe the horizon. The sky was muted gray and pale blue, the soft haze blurring distant mountains and ice fields. Time here was slow. Patience was required. The land revealed its secrets only gradually.
No storms roared, no oceans surged, only the quiet, methodical retreat of water and the steady pulse of life adapting to it. The land bridge should not have existed in human imagination, yet here it was, real, silent, and waiting. To picture this vanished world, imagine it painted by a 14th century European artist. Not with perfect perspective, not with modern realism, but with flattened horizons and hand-painted textures. The sky would appear pale and stretched, the earth rendered in muted browns and cool grays. The exposed seabed might be depicted as a wide, solemn plain, with distant ice rising like pale cathedral walls at the edge of the world. There would be no violent drama, no storm, just stillness and distance. That is how the change occurred. The sound of absence. When the sea retreats, it does not only leave behind land, it leaves behind silence. The steady rhythm of waves, gone. The smell of salt spray, faded. Shellfish beds lay exposed to the cold air. Tidal ecosystems shifted. Birds adjusted their migratory paths. Coastal forests extended slowly into newly available ground. The climate was not uniformly frozen. There were seasons, there were thaws, but the balance had tipped. Colder summers meant snow endured. Enduring snow meant thicker ice. Thicker ice meant lower seas. Lower seas meant new land. It was a chain of quiet consequences. The sky's subtle influence. Why did this happen? The answer begins far above the Earth itself. Our planet does not travel around the sun in a perfect circle. Its orbit stretches and relaxes over tens of thousands of years. The tilt of its axis shifts slightly. The wobble of its rotation changes. These cycles, later studied in detail by thinkers such as Milutin Milankovitch, alter how sunlight is distributed across the globe. But the changes in sunlight are small. A slight shift in summer warmth, a gentle redistribution of energy. On their own, they should not produce towering ice sheets, and yet they do, because Earth amplifies whispers. Snow reflects sunlight. Reflected sunlight cools the air. Cooler air preserves more snow. This feedback loop builds slowly, like interest in a quiet bank account. Small beginnings, enormous outcomes. Beneath the ice. While coastlines transformed far away, the growing ice sheets reshaped entire continents. Rivers diverted. Mountains eroded under glacial pressure. Valleys deepened. The ice moved, not quickly, but relentlessly. It flowed outward from its centers under its own immense weight, grinding rock beneath it into fine powder. This powder would later become fertile soil, but at the time, it was simply another sign that the world was colder now. The frozen north did not roar. It pressed and pressed and pressed. A human witness. Imagine now a small group of early humans standing on a ridge overlooking a widening plain. They do not know the term glacial maximum. They do not measure sea levels in feet. They notice only that the waterline seems farther away than their grandparents described. Fishing grounds shift. New grazing lands appear. The world feels larger, more open, but also colder. They adapt quietly. They move with the herds. They build fires that burn longer into the evening, and the shoreline continues to drift. Time without urgency. One of the strangest aspects of these great freezes is their patience. From the perspective of a human life, nothing dramatic happens. From the perspective of geology, everything does. The sea withdraws over thousands of years. Ice thickens over tens of thousands. Then, eventually, after reaching its peak, the cycle reverses. But that is a story for another night. For now, we remain in the slow descent. The oceans have not vanished completely. They have only stepped back, exposing new land, altering migration paths, preparing unseen bridges between continents, all without spectacle. The sky's subtle influence. Stand once more at that ancient shoreline. The air is crisp, the sky pale. In the far distance, where waves once shimmered, there is only a vast wind-brushed plain. No dramatic action unfolds, only space, only time, only the immense patient breathing of a planet moving through one of its long rhythms. The day the shoreline moved did not announce itself, but it changed the course of human history, and it began with snow that refused to melt.
Creatures of the new plains, awakening to a changed world. The wind carried a crisp scent of ice and soil across the vast plains that had once been submerged. The oceans had receded further, leaving behind flat expanses, shallow pools, and distant ridges where ice still clung stubbornly. For humans, this was not merely a landscape, it was a world reshaped, full of new challenges and possibilities. Eldrick, nearby, Mira surveyed the horizon. Signs of life. The new plains were alive in ways both familiar and strange. Herds of steppe bison grazed cautiously near distant pools. Mammoths moved in slow, deliberate paths, their massive feet leaving deep impressions in mud hardened by frost. Birds flitted between patches of exposed vegetation, their shadows casting fleeting patterns on the pale earth. Eldrick knelt beside a small pool to examine the frozen water, tracing subtle signs of fish and invertebrates trapped in the ice. Mira gathered small edible plants emerging from the thawing soil, noting the resilient greenery that had survived beneath the retreating water. No predators roared nearby, but the humans knew that survival depended on awareness, patience, and careful observation. Adapting to the new plains. Every step on the exposed seabed required caution. Eldrick led the group along firmer ground, testing the soil with his spear. The children followed closely, cautious yet curious, learning the ways of a world that had been reshaped by forces far larger than themselves. The wind carried faint scents of distant herds and vegetation. Small crustaceans scurried across the drying mud. Each sound, each movement informed the humans' understanding of this evolving environment. The exposed plains were a classroom, a survival guide written in subtle signs and slow changes. In the distance, the northern ice sheet reflected pale sunlight across the plains, creating soft glimmers on frozen puddles. Shadows stretched across ridges and pools, bending subtly over the textured ground. The entire scene appeared as if painted with careful brushstrokes by a medieval artist. Flattened perspective, muted tones, soft haze, and calm light. Eldrick's eyes followed the horizon. He sensed the cycles of ice and ocean, the slow rhythm of Earth's breath. Every day brought subtle shifts, snow lingering longer, pools freezing more quickly, herds adjusting their paths. A world in transition. The humans were travelers and witnesses.
The land was transforming before their eyes, shaping new ecosystems and new opportunities. The oceans had stepped back, and life adapted in response. Animals roamed freely across exposed plains, plants colonized new soil, and humans learned to move with awareness, care, and curiosity. The children watched, their eyes wide with wonder. They were not just survivors, they were learners, absorbing the patterns of a planet in transition. Eldrick paused to observe a distant mammoth, noting its cautious steps through snow patches. Mira adjusted her basket, collecting plants and examining their resilience. Together, they moved across a world that had been reshaped quietly, patiently, over thousands of years. Silent reflection. The plains offered both challenge and beauty. There were no dramatic events, no storms, no floods, but the quiet majesty of change was all-encompassing. The humans felt it in the wind, in the glint of ice on sunlight, in the distant calls of animals. Every frozen puddle, every exposed shell, every moving herd told a story. And Eldrick, ever watchful, understood that survival depended on patience, awareness, and respect for the quiet rhythms of this transformed world.
Winds of change, shifting seasons. The days grew shorter, and the wind carried a sharper bite across the exposed plains. Ice lingered longer in sheltered valleys, while thawed soil revealed new patches of vegetation. The humans, guided by Eldrick and Mira, moved cautiously across this transformed landscape, aware that survival depended on understanding the subtle rhythms of the environment. Eldrick, adult male, early human, approximately 35 years old, weathered bronze skin tone, long, dark brown hair falling loosely over shoulders, thick, untrimmed beard lightly frosted with cold air, deep brown, thoughtful eyes, tall, lean, muscular build, wearing layered animal hide cloak, stitched carefully with sinew thread, fur-lined leather boots, holding a long wooden spear tipped with carefully shaped stone blade, calm, observant posture, solemn, reflective facial expression, protective, vigilant aura. Followed closely, adjusting to the gusts of wind and observing the movement of distant animals. Signs of life. Even in this harsh environment, life found a way. Small birds darted across the plains, their shadows fleeting over patches of exposed mud. Steppe bison moved cautiously in the distance, while mammoths navigated frozen pools, leaving deep impressions behind. Every track and sound told Eldrick and Mira where food and danger might lie. Children followed carefully, learning to recognize the subtle signs that the adults noticed instinctively. They observed ice patterns, animal trails, and the gentle shifting of soil, slowly absorbing the lessons of survival. The challenge of adaptation. The land had changed, and humans had to adapt. Frozen puddles could be treacherous underfoot, while thawed mud threatened to trap the unwary. Eldrick tested each step with his spear, moving deliberately, while Mira guided the children along safer paths. Every choice mattered: which route to take, where to find shelter, where to observe the movement of distant herds. The wind howled softly across the plains, bending the sparse vegetation and carrying the distant calls of animals. The humans' understanding of the environment grew with each passing day, a quiet knowledge forged in patient observation. Subtle beauty. The plains, though harsh, were not devoid of beauty. Pale sunlight reflected softly on ice and water, creating muted glimmers across the landscape. Shadows stretched across ridges and pools, blending with the gentle haze.
The world appeared as if painted by a careful hand, flattened in perspective, soft in tone, serene in composition. Eldrick paused often to observe the horizon, noting changes in snow cover, animal movement, and vegetation. Mira cataloged edible plants and observed animal behavior. Together, they guided the group, teaching the children how to move with awareness and respect for the transformed land. Learning from the land. Every day, humans discovered something new, a safer path, a reliable source of water, or a subtle sign of approaching herds. They began to understand that survival was not just about strength, but about patience, observation, and adaptation. The winds of change were constant, gentle but relentless. The humans adapted, learning to read the signals of the environment and to move with caution and curiosity. They were not just surviving, they were becoming attuned to a world in transition. Silent reflection. The exposed plains stretched endlessly, pale and calm under the muted sky. No dramatic storms erupted, no sudden catastrophes occurred. Only the quiet rhythm of a world shaped by retreating oceans, advancing ice, and shifting seasons. Eldrick and Mira moved steadily, observing, teaching, and protecting. Every track in the mud, every rustle of distant animals, every glimmer of ice or water was a lesson. They were not just witnesses, they were part of the ongoing story of a world in transformation. Adapting to the new world. Early morning vigil. The first light of dawn broke over the frozen plains, casting a pale golden hue across patches of snow and exposed soil. Eldrick moved slowly, spear in hand, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Each sound, distant calls of birds, crunch of ice under hooves, told a story of life adapting to the changing world. Mira, adult female early human, approximately 32 years old, warm olive skin tone, long dark braided hair partially covered by fur hood, soft brown steady eyes, slender yet strong physique, wearing thick animal skin garments decorated with simple carved bone beads, carrying a woven basket made of dried reeds, composed resilient expression, nurturing grounded presence. Followed closely, observing subtle changes in wind direction and snow patterns. Signs of survival. Small creatures had begun to return to the exposed land. Crustaceans scuttled near shallow pools, tiny fish hid beneath thin sheets of ice, and birds moved cautiously along the edges of thawed soil. Eldrick taught the children to notice these signs, explaining how each creature indicated the safety of a path or the presence of water. The humans learned to walk lightly, preserving the fragile ecosystem. Each step was measured, each observation deliberate. This was not just survival, it was education, adaptation, and understanding. Innovation in motion. Humans experimented with new ways to carry and protect their food. Mira braided stronger baskets from reeds, while Eldrick reinforced his spear with sharpened stone for both hunting and defense. They observed the behavior of herds and tracked the safest paths across the plains. The children, wide-eyed with curiosity, imitated Eldrick and Mira, learning the delicate balance of patience and action. Every movement was a lesson, every choice a test of adaptability. Weathering the elements. The wind was relentless, carrying cold particles of snow and ice across the plains. Eldrick adjusted his cloak and shielded his face while keeping a watchful eye. Mira guided the children behind him, teaching them to brace against gusts and use the terrain for protection. Every day brought subtle changes, ice melting in unexpected places, water freezing faster in shallow pools, vegetation appearing and disappearing with the shifting soil. Humans had to be observant, resilient, and flexible. Observing life cycles. The steppe bison and mammoths moved predictably, yet subtly altering their routes based on the thaw and ice. Birds nested near small water sources, taking advantage of insects and seeds. Even small creatures, mice, insects, and crustaceans, revealed patterns that humans could interpret. Eldrick paused frequently to record these observations mentally, noting paths of herds and changes in the environment. Mira observed plant growth and availability of edible roots and greens. Together, they maintained a careful balance between movement, hunting, and preservation. Lessons from a changing world. The exposed plains were harsh, yet full of lessons. Humans were no longer merely observers, they were participants in a living, evolving ecosystem. Their understanding deepened with every sunrise, every step across mud and snow, every encounter with flora and fauna. Adaptation was slow, deliberate, and necessary. Eldrick, Mira, and the children moved as one, learning to respect the rhythms of this transformed world, understanding that survival depended on awareness, patience, and empathy with the land around them. Quiet evening. As the sun set, casting muted pinks and blues across the plains, humans settled near a small cluster of rocks and ice. Fires were carefully kindled, meals prepared from gathered plants and small game. The world was quiet, serene, and alive with subtle activity. Eldrick and Mira watched the children as they rested, thinking of the many days ahead, of learning, adaptation, and the slow mastery of this newly revealed world. The first great threat. Ominous signs. The wind carried a strange chill, sharper and heavier than usual. Distant clouds gathered low on the horizon, casting muted shadows over the thawed plains. Eldrick's eyes narrowed as he scanned the sky. Something was coming, an event that could change everything. Mira moved beside him, sensing his unease. The approaching storm. Clouds thickened, swirling above the plains in muted grays and pale blues. The wind picked up, carrying ice shards and biting cold. Eldrick led the group toward a ridge, knowing that shelter was crucial. The children followed, wide-eyed, trusting Eldrick's judgment. Small animals scurried for cover, while distant mammoths and bison shifted nervously, sensing the change before the humans could. Every sound, every movement was a signal. Survival under threat. The storm unleashed itself gradually, a mixture of heavy snow, sharp wind, and icy rain. The humans huddled together, using rocks and natural ridges for protection. Eldrick positioned himself at the front, spear ready, scanning for immediate danger, while Mira covered the children with her body and whispered calming words. Survival depended not on strength alone, but on foresight, awareness, and careful action. Every decision mattered. Which ridge offered the best shelter? Which path was safest? Which movements could avoid injury? Observing and learning. Even amid the storm, Eldrick noticed subtle signs of the environment. Ice forming on low branches, snow shifting in patterns, distant animals taking protective routes. Mira observed plant resilience, noting which areas might provide future food or firewood. The children learned quickly, noticing how Eldrick and Mira adjusted clothing, position, and movement to weather the storm. Adaptation was being taught moment by moment. calm after chaos. After hours, the storm began to fade. Snow patches remained, ice crusted across puddles, and the wind subsided. The humans emerged cautiously, assessing their surroundings. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, but nothing would be the same. Eldrick and Mira had guided their group through their first truly dangerous natural threat on the exposed plains. They had survived, learned, and adapted. The world remained harsh, but they had proven that awareness and teamwork could overcome even the first great threat. Reflection. As the sky cleared, muted sunlight glimmered across the plains. The humans took a moment to rest, drinking from melted snow and observing distant herds cautiously, resuming movement. Eldrick's eyes scanned the horizon, knowing more storms would come, but confident that each challenge would teach new lessons. Mira adjusted her basket, checking supplies, while the children absorbed the experiences silently, their eyes wide with understanding. The plains were a living teacher, harsh but fair, and the humans were learning its lessons with patience, vigilance, and resilience. Lessons of the Frozen Plains. Morning observations. The plains awoke in mused silence. Snow patches glimmered under the pale sunlight, ice reflecting faint hues of pink and gold. Eldrick walked slowly, spear in hand, scanning every ridge and shallow pool. Mira followed closely, carrying her basket of gathered roots and small edible plants, teaching the children how to identify safe food. Tracking the herds. The humans observed distant mammoths and steppe bison, noting their paths across the thawed plains. Every hoofprint, every shadow was a lesson. Eldrick explained how to predict movements, avoid danger, and locate areas rich in vegetation. Children followed attentively, their small feet leaving tiny impressions beside Eldrick and Mira. The adults demonstrated patience and precision, showing how survival was a mix of observation, intelligence, and careful action. Subtle threats. Though the storm had passed, dangers remained. Thin ice patches could trap the unwary. Hidden mud could slow movement, and sharp winds could sap strength. Eldrick carefully tested each step, teaching the children to move with awareness, while Mira pointed out edible plants and safe areas for shelter. Even the smallest creatures revealed important lessons. Insects indicated plant growth, birds signaled the proximity of water, and small mammals showed the safest routes. Innovation and adaptation. Humans began improving their tools and shelters. Eldrick sharpened spear tips for hunting larger prey, while keeping small knives for safety. Mira braided more durable baskets and prepared insulated bedding from reeds and furs. Each action was deliberate, part of a growing understanding of the frozen plains' resources. The children learned quickly, practicing what Eldrick and Mira demonstrated. They were becoming attuned to the environment, understanding that observation, patience, and creativity were keys to survival. The beauty in harshness. Despite its challenges, the plains held subtle beauty. Pale sunlight glinted on ice, shadows stretched gently across frozen ridges, and soft mist hung over thawed soil. The world seemed painted in muted earth tones, calm, serene, and alive with quiet rhythms. Eldrick paused often, taking in the horizon, while Mira cataloged plant growth and animal behavior. Together,
They guided the group, teaching the next generation to respect and coexist with the harsh yet mesmerizing land. Evening reflection. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, the humans gathered near a cluster of rocks for shelter. Fires glowed softly, meals prepared from gathered plants and small game. The children rested, absorbing the lessons of the day through observation and quiet reflection. Eldrick looked toward the distant plains, aware that more challenges awaited. Yet he also felt confidence that knowledge, teamwork, and careful attention to the world would allow humans not only to survive, but to thrive in this transformed environment.
The edge of survival. Shifting terrain. The thawed plains had begun to change. Melted ice had created deep puddles and soft mud that made walking treacherous. Eldrick carefully tested each step before moving forward, guiding the group along safer paths. Mira followed closely, assisting the children as they navigated the muddy terrain. Unexpected flood. A sudden thaw upstream had created a surge of water across the plains. Shallow pools became torrents, and ice sheets shifted unpredictably. Eldrick quickly assessed the situation, finding higher ground for the group to move toward. The children clung to Mira's hands, trusting her guidance as Eldrick scanned the horizon for safe routes. Small animals scrambled in panic, signaling danger in subtle ways. Adaptation in action. Eldrick demonstrated how to balance on slippery rocks, how to use branches to test stability, and how to stay together as a unit. Mira reinforced lessons of safety, instructing the children to watch Eldrick's movements and mimic them carefully. Each step was deliberate. Every observation counted. Survival depended on patience, awareness, and quick learning. Observing the world. Despite the danger, the plains offered lessons. Birds flew low, guiding humans away from fragile ice. Mammoths and bison shifted paths, showing patterns of safer terrain. Even small footprints in mud indicated hidden dangers or stable areas. Humans learned to interpret these signals, turning environmental observation into practical knowledge. Each day built skill, intuition, and confidence. Calm after the surge. Once the water receded, the group settled near a high ridge. Fires were kindled, warm light reflected on the ice, and soft meals were prepared from gathered plants and small game. Eldrick and Mira observed the children, noting how they had learned from the flood. Their awareness had increased, their instincts sharpened. This was more than survival. It was education, adaptation, and resilience. Reflection. As dusk fell, Eldrick looked over the transformed plains. The frozen landscape had revealed new dangers and new opportunities. Mira gathered plants and checked supplies, while the children rested, absorbing the lessons silently. The humans had survived yet another test of adaptability, proving that awareness, patience, and teamwork could overcome even unpredictable threats. The plains remained harsh and ever-changing, but the group had learned to respect its rhythms and trust their skills. A new world emerges. Dawn of discovery. The plains glimmered with the first light of a crisp morning. Snow and ice had partially melted, leaving puddles that reflected the pale golden sunrise. Eldrick and Mira led the group carefully along a ridge, scanning the horizon for new opportunities and dangers.
Eldrick, adult male, early human, approximately 35 years old, weathered bronze skin tone, long dark brown hair falling loosely over shoulders, thick untrimmed beard lightly frosted with cold air, deep brown thoughtful eyes, tall lean muscular build, wearing thick animal hide cloak stitched carefully with sinew thread, fur-lined leather boots, holding a long wooden spear tipped with carefully shaped stone blade, calm, observant posture, solemn, reflective facial expression, protective, vigilant aura. Mira, adult female early human, approximately 32 years old, warm olive skin tone, long dark braided hair partially covered by fur hood, soft brown steady eyes, slender yet strong physique, wearing thick animal skin garments decorated with simple carved bone beads, carrying a woven basket made of dried reeds, composed, resilient expression, nurturing, grounded presence. Exploring new territories. The group descended into previously unseen valleys where patches of green began to emerge from thawed soil. Small streams trickled through shallow channels, and distant herds grazed cautiously. Eldrick taught the children to identify safe paths, edible plants, and signs of predators. The world was changing, and humans had to adapt faster than ever. Each observation became a lesson in survival, each movement a calculated step toward a sustainable life. Building on knowledge. Eldrick and Mira demonstrated new ways to build temporary shelters using reeds, ice, and animal hides. Fires were positioned to maximize warmth while minimizing smoke exposure. Tools were refined for hunting, gathering, and maintaining safety. The children practiced these techniques, guided carefully by the adults. Mistakes were lessons, and successes were celebrated quietly, reinforcing the value of observation and adaptability. Harmony with nature. Humans began to understand subtle rhythms of the plains. They observed how wildlife responded to environmental changes, noting safe and dangerous areas. Birds, small mammals, and distant herds all acted as guides, teaching the humans to coexist rather than dominate. The group moved with patience, respecting the fragile balance of this new world. Every action had a consequence. Every choice required thought and care. Reflection and hope. As evening approached, Eldrick and Mira gathered the group near a calm stream. Fires glowed warmly, casting reflections on the thawed puddles. Children rested quietly, absorbing the day's lessons, while Eldrick scanned the horizon thoughtfully. The humans had endured storms, floods, shifting ice, and treacherous terrain. They had adapted, observed, and learned. Now the plains were not only a place of survival, but also a teacher, guiding them toward a sustainable future. The first true understanding had emerged. In this transformed world, awareness, patience, teamwork, and respect for nature would allow humans not only to survive, but to thrive. Closing thoughts. The golden light of dusk bathed the frozen plains, soft haze lingering over the distant ridges. Eldrick and Mira stood side by side, knowing the lessons of the past 10 episodes had prepared their group for anything the future might hold. The oceans may have disappeared, the landscape transformed, but humanity had proven resilient, adaptable, and wise enough to face the challenges ahead. The plains whispered a new story, a story of survival, discovery, and hope.